Hey, Marcus House with you here, and welcome to episode 20 in our quick progression series. From the last episode, you can see we have now over 5 million in funds, and we've unlocked the whole tech tree. The first thing we're going to do, however, is upgrade our launch pad for 423,000. And we're going to upgrade our vehicle assembly building too, which is just over 1,200,000 in funds. We'll just jump straight into the vehicle assembly building, and you'll notice now that I've actually got one mod installed, that being Kerbal Engineer, which will just give us a few nice readouts when we need them. Now in this episode we're going to be building what I like to call the Super Lifter. This vessel is a single stage to orbit rocket which can lift a huge volume up into orbit and still return safely. Just starting here with the largest remote unit, 2 large batteries and a large reaction wheel. And we'll just cap that off with the protective rocket nose cone MK7. Next we're just going to pop on the Kerbal engineering system just on top of the batteries here. And look, you don't actually need this, you don't need to install this mod. I like to have it on simply so that I can see a lot of information without going into map view. We'll just grab a docking port, turn it upside down and plonk it underneath the guidance unit. The next thing we're going to do is build a giant horizontal arm coming out from our central core, made out of modular girder segments, the extra large ones. What we're doing here, of course, is just lining up 3 or 4 of these, however far out we need to go. We're just going to make the one at the moment, and then we'll actually mirror all these in a radial fashion later on. I've got 5 there currently, but that actually looks pretty ridiculous, so we're going to take one of those off and just have the 4. And we'll just grab a very small FLT 100 fuel tank and we'll just plonk this on the end, right on the end of the arm, and we'll just slightly move this using the move tool just so it's perfectly centered to the arm. This is going to be the top of our vessel here, so what we need to do now is actually pop on an MK16 extra large parachute. And then just attached to the side of this as well will be the MK12 radial mount drogue chute. And this is going to allow us to drop both of our chutes to help us slow down easier as we come into the lower atmosphere. As we're completing this build, you'll see down the bottom we've got new readouts that you probably may not have seen before if you haven't used Kerbal Engineer. And we get all sorts of handy little readouts such as delta V, the thrust to weight ratio, the weight of the vessel and the resources available. We'll just grab the C7 1.25 to 2.5 meter adapter, and we're going to extend that out even further with an MK3 adapter now. All of the tanks that I'm selecting for the Super Lifter are liquid fuel and oxidizer combined tanks. And we'll just cap this off now with the last adapter, the MK3 to the 3.75 meter adapter. Lastly, for our fuel tanks, we want to grab the largest Kerbidine S3 14400 tank, and we're going to stack 3 of these on top of each other. And in order to lift this very, very big fuel tank now, we need the Mammoth liquid fuel engine, the largest fuel engine in the game. Now we can get a pretty good idea of our thrust to weight ratio for the entire rocket by having a look just here right now. We've got a thrust to weight of 1.3. 1.3 does make a bit of a slow lift-off, but it also gives us a lot of rocket fuel in our tanks. Now we're just going to add 8 air brakes in symmetry mode at the top of our fuel tank. This is going to give us much better ability to slow down once we enter the atmosphere when we come to land. Because this is such a very large rocket, we need some pretty powerful RCS engines, so we're grabbing the Werner engines. So we've added 1 at the top, we've added 1 at the bottom, and we'll just add 1 here in the middle. That large pipe there running down is actually obscuring the Werner engine underneath, so what I'm going to do is use the move tool, and I'll just adjust this so that it's just sitting out on top of the pipe. Otherwise you can't even tell it's there. So at a glance now, that's reasonably complete. That's about all we need on this particular arm of the rocket. Now the next thing we need to do is actually multiply this right around. We're going to switch this into a symmetry 8 mode from the end of the arm there. So just adding 8 of those evenly right around the central core. You'll see there now that all of the booster segments are actually spaced way out from the central core area. And the spacing for this can be really easily adjusted by just using the move tool on the arm and actually moving that first girder in straight through the core. This means that if you've got a wider payload, you can easily adjust the spacing of your boosters on the outside. So now we just need to grab some struts so that we can hold this whole thing together. Without these, it's going to be incredibly unstable. So we'll just pop a set in symmetry mode down the bottom and also up the top. That should hold it all nicely together. And we'll just start checking our staging now. Obviously we want our parachutes to actually be staged after our rocket engines. Really, the staging could probably just assume that parachutes probably are never likely to be fired off in the same stage as the engines. And that's about it. We'll save this, call it the Super Lifter. You'll see there from our Kerbal engineer readout that we're still at that 1.3 mark for our thruster weight. You can probably see now that under the docking port in the centre here we can attach a huge payload, which is obviously the whole point of this vessel. We're just essentially going to pop it on the launch pad just to test out a few things first though. There was a little bit of a wobble in the top arms there, so we'll probably add a few struts to that. We'll just test out those air brakes. They're coming out nicely, they're not touching each other, that's good. We could actually probably add more in between though, actually, now that I look at that. The RCS seems to be working fine, and actually our parachutes are back the front. They need to fire in the opposite order of that, so we need to fix that as well. We'll just revert this back to the vehicle assembly building and make a few quick alterations. Just popping on a second set of air brakes and speeding up the video at the same time so you're not watching through that again. And that's going to look quite nice, I think. 2 sets of air brakes stacked on top of each other and spaced between each other at the same time. I think that's going to look quite effective as they come out. And actually we can test the way those air brakes come out, of course, just from the vehicle assembly building itself, so we can pull them out and make sure they don't touch each other, and then we can bring them back in. Just going to try as well to stabilise the top arms with this extra strut. It's a little hard to get this angle quite right. We'll just anchor it to the top of our fuel tanks and just plonk it on. That looks like a nice position there, and there we go. And what was the other? Oh, the other problem was our parachutes, so we're just going to make sure that the drogue chutes are actually staged before the main chutes afterwards there. Actually, I've just realised as well we need a way to rotate the vessel with some Werner engines as well, so I'll grab 2 more Werner engines and place them on the sides, both sides at the centre of the fuel tank. That there's just going to mean that we can effectively roll the vessel if we need to. So we'll save the Super Lifter and we'll just make a copy of this for our space station part 1. So that we can simply undock the central part that we're lifting into space. We'll start with a docking port, we'll add a very large RCS tank, an Mk3 adapter, and then we're actually going to use the Mk3 liquid fuel fuselage, the long one. We're going to whack 2 of those together. For the bottom, we'll just use the Mk3 adapter again, turned upside down, and the idea is that this is going to be almost completely liquid fueled for the atomic motors that we're going to put on here. Now we're removing a lot of the oxidizer out of this tank simply because we only need them for the Werner engine, so we actually don't need much oxidizer at all. And we're just going to grab the very handy quad adapter here, which is going to allow us to drop 4 LVN atomic rocket motors onto the end of this stage. That's not enough power for me though. I'm going to add 8 more Mk1 liquid fuel tanks around here and just move them so they're sitting in there nicely. Then I'm going to grab the NCS adapters and pop on the top there just so that it tidies that up nicely, and topping that off with some small nose cones, and then on go our atomic rocket motors. And of course we need the fuel from our main liquid fuel tanks to flow into these smaller liquid fuel tanks for the outer engines, so we'll add the external fuel ducts there. And we'll just tidy everything up, make sure that our staging is now correct. Now for the first part of our space station, we want to add a variety of different docking mechanisms for all sorts of craft that might visit. For some reason though, you can't use the large docking ports on the side of this craft without actually first putting down an attachment point. So I'm using those there, and what we need to do is space these out evenly, 3 across down the sides of our liquid fuel tanks. So on go 2, 4, 6 of those large docking ports. We'll just pop on 2 Clampotron docking ports down the side there, and we'll also install the Clampotron docking port Junior down at that bottom slot there. Again, this is all mirrored down the other side of the vessel as well. We are of course going to need a way to recharge our batteries, so we're going to grab 4 extra large solar panels, and we'll pop them on all 4 corners down the bottom of the fuel tanks. And we'll just assign these to an action group so we can easily toggle them on or off. Again, we're going to use the same method for our RCS. We're going to grab the Werner engines. We'll pop 4 of those right at the top of our vessel and 4 for the bottom. And we could add 4 to the middle, but I don't think it will actually. We don't need them. Again, I'll add a Kerbal engineer unit so that we can diagnose things easily, and I'll grab a remote core, and I've just realised that we didn't have any batteries, so we're adding the batteries on now as well. We'll just move those Werner engines on top of the batteries there, and that's about it for part 1 of our space station. What we need to do now is secure it to our super lifter correctly, so we're going to grab some struts, and we're going to anchor this to several places on our rockets. We're going to hook it up to the top and to the bottom of our fuel tanks. And there we go there. Oh, that didn't anchor properly. We'll try that again. Further up this time, we'll try anchoring that and still no... Oh, because the solar panels are in the way. Just above the solar panels this time, and there we go. Now, one little finishing touch we might add to this actually is just to add some lighting up on the top arms of our super lifter, just so that we can actually light up our central core when we want to. We'll just rotate those around so they're pointing downwards quite a long way so that we can light the whole thing up. And whoop, that's better there. And we'll turn those off. Obviously you can adjust the amount of light coming out of those as well, which is quite good. You can tweak that until the lighting is just right. If we remove our central component, you'll see that the value of our super lifter is 883,000 in funds. When we actually remove all the fuel, however, you'll notice that the value drops even more, down to around 703,000 in funds. Essentially that means, of course, that the fuel alone costs us around 180,000 in funds, which is quite a hefty amount just for the fuel tanks. As soon as we reattach everything, we're up well over 1 million in funds there. But what we can gauge from this essentially is that if we can land our super lifter right near the Kerbal Space Center, we should get back almost 700,000 in funds. Just doing some last minute testing here, making sure our lights are working properly. That looks good. Also make sure our action group for our solar panels is working fine. That's looking good too. And of course, it never hurts to make sure that all your stages look like they're ordered correctly. So we're just doing that again. That's looking pretty good there as well. 3, 2, 1, and firing there, launching ourselves for the first time in our super lifter. Because we've got a fairly low thrust to weight ratio, we're not going to start doing our gravity turn until we hit around 100 meters per second. What we'll be doing here as well is actually keeping a very close eye on our Kerbal engineer readout in the bottom right hand side there. As we approach 100 meters per second, we're going to roll here slightly towards the 90-degree mark. With those 8 mammoth engines, we're punching out a huge 30,000 kilonewtons of thrust. On liftoff, our super lifter has a thrust to weight ratio of around 1.2 to 1.3. However, as our fuel tanks empty, our thrust to weight ratio climbs right up to almost 5.5. You can see there at the bottom right, I've got my cursor pointed there at the inclination. I want to keep this as low as we can, as close to 0 as we can. Because the Kerbal Space Center is on this 0-degree inclination, it means that we can come back and land very close to the Kerbal Space Center when we try to land the super lifter. Again, to adjust your inclination, you can just point slightly up from your prograde marker or slightly down. As we pass 70,000 with our apoapsis, we're going to roll over towards that 90-degree marker. In this flight, we're targeting an orbit height of 90,000 meters, so we're going to cut our engines when we approach that. And we'll just cut the engines right there. Now we'll just turn on those RCS thrusters here just to keep ourselves pointed in the right direction, as we're still getting a little bit of atmospheric drag going on. So that we don't alter our apoapsis height too much, we're just going to time warp right up until we're about 10 seconds away from our apoapsis marker. The great thing with Kerbal Engineer is we can now see all of this detail without having to switch over into map view. Just doing our final burn here now so that we can get into a circularized orbit. As we're passing the apoapsis marker, we can just pitch upwards slightly just to keep the apoapsis marker sitting right back on us. You can see it fell behind a little there, but it's now on its way back. And as we approach orbital velocity, we're backing our thrust right off, and there we go, circularized there. It's now time to release our gigantic payload for part 1 of our space station, so we're just going to decouple from our docking port. This is done, of course, just by right-clicking the docking port and selecting Decouple Node. And as if by magic, all of the struts just magically remove themselves. We'll just switch our lights on. And all we need to do now is just add a very small thrust just to slowly push ourselves away. And there goes the start of our space station build floating beautifully away. Keep in mind that this whole part 1 section is completely full of liquid fuel and using those atomic rocket motors, so it's going to be very efficient. Switching to the super lifter, we can see that we've got plenty of fuel left to make a landing, so that should be fine. Switching to the start of our space station, and we're going to run a few tests on this to make sure that it's all happy. The first thing we're going to do is pop out those solar panels, make sure they're extending out beautifully, and they are. Look at those coming out, that's very, very nice. Switching on our RCS, and we're just going to do a few quick tests to make sure that our craft will rotate correctly as we've intended, and it is. And we'll just do a very quick fire of our atomic rocket motors, make sure all those are working correctly as well, and that's beautiful right there. Switching back to the super lifter now, we're going to plan our incoming landing over the Kerbal Space Center, so we're time warping around to the opposite side of Kerbin. And what we want to do here is actually bring our periapsis down so that's way out over the ocean, right out in front of the Kerbal Space Center, so we're warping a little further than maybe we normally would, and just doing a slight burn there to bring the periapsis right down, just around that 35km mark from the surface. And we'll just time warp now until we start hitting the atmosphere with the super lifter. There we go there. Using those RCS thrusters to point ourselves in a retrograde manner. We'll just hit the brakes action group to bring out those air brakes. They look excellent. These air brakes aren't going to do a huge amount in the upper atmosphere, but as we pass 50,000 meters, we're going to find that they're going to give us a great amount of drag and slow us down quite a bit. And you can just start to see the glowing atmosphere hitting us there at Mach 6.7. As we're in map view over here, you can see our periapsis dropping slowly. And as you'll see now, we're going to start getting some heat warnings on those air brakes. The air brakes probably aren't intended to be used as heat shields, but we can actually use them until they look like they're about to explode, so these are really helping reduce a lot of velocity right now. And they're getting very close to exploding now, very, very close, so it's about time to start bringing these in, and better bring them in now actually. Speed now at under 2,000 meters per second. The air brakes have actually removed around 400 meters per second in velocity, so that's a very good reason to have used them. The next thing we're going to have trouble with now, though, are our engines. They're going to want to explode here pretty soon now. The reason we're set up to overshoot the Kerbal Space Center at the moment is we need to use our engines to actually wipe off a lot of velocity towards the end of our descent. And we're just going to do our very first re-entry burn here now, just so that we can wipe off enough velocity to keep our engines from exploding. Oh, we got very close to losing an engine, and engine cut off there. As we wipe off the next few hundred meters per second, we're just going to do a few more small burns just so that we stop our engines from exploding. That should be enough. 1400 meters per second left now, and we're at a stage where our overheating problems are now over. Our approach is actually looking really good, really good. It looks like we should be able to get very close to the Kerbal Space Center. As we come over, we're just going to get ready to pull out our air brakes. We're still moving much too fast to use drogue chutes at this stage, so we're going to pull those air brakes out here, and now out they come. And look at the velocity. You can see the velocity just being wiped out straight away by those air brakes. And there we go there. We're down under 300 meters per second. In fact, we probably didn't even need the drogue chutes looking at that. The air brakes are doing a pretty good job. We will just pop out the drogue chutes though, first of all. Followed almost immediately by our main chutes. I can't believe how close I've gotten to the Kerbal Space Center actually. That is awesome. We are of course going to be using our engines as we touch the ground, but we're only going to be landing on the engines themselves, so we've got to touch down slowly. And just coming up, using the engines here. Oh, touchdown, yes! That was awesome. Lights off, air brakes in, and there we go, right next to the Space Center. Couldn't have got it much better than that. We actually have quite a bit of fuel left, so we could have used our engines even more if we needed to. Recovering now, of course, and we can see here that we've recovered 98% of the super lifter's value. Now, obviously this is excluding the cost of the fuel, so that is a very good result. What we'll be doing next episode is continuing on with our space station build, the next segment. As we sign off today, we're going to show a much less ideal landing attempt. So I hope you enjoyed that super lifter video. If you have any questions for me, please whack them down in the comments below. Thank you very much for those of you that have subscribed, and for those that haven't yet, please do subscribe to see more. Follow me on Twitter at MarcusHouseGame, and we'll see you in the next video. Oh damn it, this is no good. Ah, great googly moogly. A lot of velocity very quickly, so this is all going to plan. The heat shield on this is extremely stable. You can see there we're just using our retrograde marker on our SAS mode. And there goes the orbiter probe above us there. As we demonstrated in the last episode, we can just pick up all of those science experiments. We don't need to transmit them back straight away.